Welcome back to Perspectives 2025. We are ready for session 3, which is going to be exciting, and we want everyone to be energized. We know it's the middle of the day, and the middle of the day for WA, and heading towards the end of the day for the rest of us. But we've got some great speakers lined up for the next couple of sessions, and I really hope you can get excited about it. I'd like to start by introducing Kim Hutchinson. Kim Hutchinson is a proudly neurodivergent entrepreneur, lived experience consultant, and advocate. As the founder of What Unites, Kim helps organizations create inclusive workplaces where every thinker can do their best work. Her expertise spans mental health, disability, and the social sector, with a focus on economic inclusion and workplace well-being. Selected for the prestigious entrepreneurial programs like Remarkable Launcher and the Plus Eight Pre-Accelerator, Kim is committed to driving systemic change to improve neurodivergent well-being. Her work challenges stigma, reframes neurodivergence, and champions psychologically safer workplaces so everyone can show up authentically. Thank you so much, Kim, for being here, and we look forward to hearing you speak.
Great, thanks, Jess, for the introduction. Hi, I'm Kim. I'm speaking to you today from Wajak Noongar Budja, where I'm lucky to live and work. An interesting fun fact about me was last year I was lucky to be a backup speaker for Perspectives while I was very early in my lived experience journey, so I had only done a few engagements at that point in time. And having Finding North be one of my first believers has been a big springboard for me, and it gave me the confidence to put myself out there. And since then, I've been really lucky to find new and creative ways to use my lived experience to drive change, including through entrepreneurship and consulting. So today I'm excited to share a project that's very close to my heart. It's not just about mental health, it's about human rights and the right to be seen, to belong, and to thrive. So for many of us, work is a big part of how we show up in the world. It's where we contribute our gifts, connect with our purpose, and create impact. So it's no surprise that work deeply affects our mental health. So a global survey by the Workforce Institute at UKG, they interviewed 2,000 people across different countries and found that managers impact our mental health just as much as our significant partner does, and even more than our doctor or therapist. And most mental health systems are very much reactive, and that kind of poses a question of what if we flip that? Like, what if workplaces were designed to build well-being from the start, and places that aren't just physically safe, but psychologically safe? And in Australia, employers now have a legal and ethical responsibility to manage psychosocial risks at work, and that means creating a culture where people feel comfortable to speak up, to share their ideas, and even make mistakes without fear of being judged or punished. And because safe and inclusive workplaces aren't a luxury, they're not a nice to have, they're a human right. So my own mental health challenges began in my teens, and I've spent my life as a perfectionist and a people pleaser, and I was constantly putting myself last. And for years, we interpreted a lot of my struggles through the lens of gender and culture. And then it was in 2022 where I hit rock bottom and I left a career that I had built for over a decade. And I was sadly mostly bedridden for nearly a year. And what changed my path was actually a romance novel about a burnt out, high achieving Asian woman who was navigating burnout and the weight of family expectations. And I guess it goes to show the importance of representation, even if it's fictional, because that story, reading it, it just resonated so much with me. And it led me to learn more about neurodivergence and discover that I'm autistic and ADHD. And it gave me a whole new way to understand myself with compassion and not shame. So while diagnosis brought clarity and self-compassion, it also brought stigma. And the report read like this long list of problems, page after page, of how I fell short. And the unspoken message was that you'll be okay as long as you can cover it up. And sadly, then that document then was a guide in terms of the healthcare I subsequently received, and I was then pressured and supported and encouraged to mask, and I did so constantly, and I was practicing facial expressions, faking eye contact, rehearsing conversations, and it was exhausting and physically, like emotionally and mentally as well. And I was really overwhelmed because then it felt like, oh, how am I going to sort of re-enter society in a way if I'm struggling to do these things? And through connecting through peer support groups, I had then learned how dangerous it was. And research shows that masking increases the risk of mental health issues. And actually, last year there was some research from the University of Queensland that found that autistic people without intellectual disability are 5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. Uh, and that's really confronting. And then I realized through the peer support group that that wasn't sustainable and I needed to do something different. And over time, I learned that my neurodivergence isn't the flaw that the medical professionals had made it out to be, but it's a different way of thinking and it's a different way of seeing and contributing to the world. And with time, looking back, I can see that my proudest achievements didn't happen despite my differences, but because of them. And that's why I started my own business to help make it safer for people to show up authentically. So, as part of my work, I began to interview neurodivergent employees across Australia. I was curious and wanted to learn more about our experiences in the workplace. And the same themes just kept coming up again and again and again. And we're often told that we're either too much or we're not enough of something, or somehow we're both, which is even more confusing. And many of us have been shamed or bullied for who we are, like our pattern recognition or our creative problem solving not being valued, or our passion for justice was being seen as too disruptive, or our deep focus or hyper focus were misunderstood, or our honesty was seen as inappropriate. But these aren't deficits, they're differences. And in the right environment, they're powerful strengths. And I felt my own sense of justice well up in my chest as I continued to hear more and more stories. And there was this sense that we need to stop asking people to change who they are and start changing the environments. And I like to think of it like yoga, where everyone does the same posture, just differently. Some of us need blocks, some of us will bend our knees because we're not very flexible. I'm in that camp. But no one's doing it wrong. It's just our own unique expression. And by the end, we've all completed the class in our own way. And that's how I see neurodivergence at work. Difference doesn't mean broken. Um, it just means that we need space to show up as who we are. And the research shows that neurodiverse teams are 30% more productive and inclusive teams are 6 times more innovative. So it's a business no-brainer, but it's not just about performance. It's about our human dignity, agency, and our rights. So what I found in those conversations is that many organizations say that they support diversity, but there's no follow through. And that's why I created the Impact Thinkers framework to be able to talk about the value of neurodiversity without relying on diagnostic labels, especially when disclosure is risky and feels unsafe. And it's also based on the social model of disability, where the idea is that we're not disabled by our differences, but by the environments that don't support us. So it stands for innovation, which is how we solve problems, mastery, which is how we learn, presence is how we focus, advisory is how we communicate and share our ideas, collaboration is how we work together, and thrive is how we grow through feedback. So it's a strengths-based approach that reframes what we've been shamed for into language that highlights what we bring and what we need to allow us to show up as our best. And it affirms the human right for all of us to be seen, valued, and supported at work. So I've been testing the framework with individuals and teams, and the feedback has been really interesting and really insightful. So I feel really lucky to have had some really real and honest conversations with lots of different people about how they're showing up at work and how much of themselves that they're still hiding, whether they're neurodivergent or neurotypical. And it's become a surprisingly human way to actually sort of take the temperature of psychological safety in teams. And it also helps spot burnout risks early because if you can't show up as yourself, you're constantly spending energy trying to fit into an environment that wasn't built with you in mind. So it's essentially highlighting how you're working in hard mode. And that's not just exhausting, but it's unsustainable and could be dangerous as well. And one participant said that she had felt so empowered and it helped her flip the narrative in her brain to go and look at what she needed out of an organization. And for her, it wasn't just about getting another job, it was about reclaiming her identity, her confidence, and her sense of hope. And it's also about escaping that vicious cycle of getting into a role, burning out, leaving the role, trying to recover or rest, and then trying to find a new role and having that cycle constantly continue and also worsen um, with each cycle, since the stories I heard is that the more that this happens each time, it takes us longer to get back out there because we're constantly being broken. And so it's about moving people from surviving to being people who can hold our own pens and write our own story. So I've been taking some small and steady steps, and it's exciting to see the momentum growing slowly. So at the moment, I'm piloting an edition for neurodiverse teams with 120 employees at a major organisation in the energy sector here in WA. I've also been working with different neurodivergent job seekers to better support their experience. And also, as Jess mentioned earlier, lucky to be selected in a disability tech program. And also continue to get support to develop my idea. So it's been really incredible to see how lived experience can drive innovation because I think having, uh, for us, people with lived experience, we've been through these systems so we can see what's working and what's not. And so I think we're very well placed to see what needs to change and how we can rebuild what that future looks like, not just for us, but for others. And it's not just about yet another workplace initiative, but it's part of that bigger movement that we're all working towards for equity and justice and aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Goals and our fundamental human rights for good health and well-being, which is Goal 3, decent work and economic growth, which is Goal 8, and reduced inequalities for Goal 10. So we can all play a part in reframing that story. So I wanted to share sort of 3 small but powerful things that we can all do. So it's kind of alliterative with the 3 S's. The first one is shining your strengths, and it's about noticing and appreciating what makes you unique and coming from that place of strength and that place of empowerment. And then the next step then is to think about, based on those strengths, what helps you show up in that way and what gets in the way? What are those barriers? And being able to let other people know by sharing what you need. And if you're not even sure what you need, it's okay. You can have conversations with people to explore what's possible and to be able to brainstorm it together because ultimately everyone wins when we can show up as ourselves. And the responsibility is not just on us to figure it out, but it's a shared relational opportunity. And lastly, it's to support others to feel safe and making space for those honest conversations, finding ways where we can check in with other people, whether it's through work or our community, of what is it that you need to feel safer to be yourself in this space. And I think for me, every act of understanding that we explore, no matter how small, like moves us closer to that world where we can all belong and we can do this by example. And when people feel safe to be themselves, everyone wins. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully, I wasn't speaking too fast with nerves, but I'm happy to take questions now, and I'd love to connect whether you've got questions or want to chat or know an organization that might want to work with me. For me, it's definitely more than a business. It's about creating a world where we can all feel safer to be our authentic selves. And I think, as I've mentioned, it's because inclusion, safety, and self-expression aren't just nice to have, they're human rights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was incredible to listen to. And as someone who is neurodivergent and obsessed with changing workplace context and things like that, I could definitely appreciate everything that you're talking about. I really love that you touched on the occupational health and safety law changes as well, because I'm kind of just waiting for that to blow up. It's kind of like it's come into practice, but people aren't, like, organizations aren't ready for that practice, even though they've had a year to prepare themselves. It's now come into law, and I think that soon we're going to start to see these organizations start to get charged by workplace health and safety, and it will start to become more of a conversation. And unfortunately, we might have to wait for things that are horrible to happen to people before changes start to be made, because they have to be done at a legal level. And it shouldn't take a legality for people to be treated nice in the workplace. And that's something that's really upsetting for me. When I do my training with organizations around workplace health and safety, with the new changes, the first thing I say to them is, don't be a dick. That's like the starting point. Just don't be a dick. Just imagine how you're speaking to somebody, and that's sort of your starting point, is to start looking at things in a way in which people are going to feel safe and happy at work. And whether that's someone who's neurodivergent, suffering from mental health, or a psychological hazard has been identified and that needs to be addressed, is making sure that it is being addressed. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. It's interesting you mentioned that, because it is sad that in terms of the state of the world, we've now come to having to make these requirements of how to be a human being and to spell them out so explicitly. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see, I guess, the uptick in cases now that's been put into place.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was very happy when the law went into place. I was like over the moon. So but listen, we've had some great questions come through. So how can I understand people who don't feel safe that they can unmask?
Well, I think with unmasking, it is a very complex thing, because I guess over time we've been raised in, I guess we're not in a bubble, where we are raised in a society that there's different sort of power and privilege dynamics in place. So it can be difficult for people who have less privileges or are different in different ways, whether it's through gender, culture, who we love, and all those different sort of aspects, or like our housing situation or the color of our skin. And with that, that can affect how we feel in a particular environment, and certain pressures we might feel to try and fit in. And it's a safety measure that we've been built and taught by society to do. So it can be it's an ongoing journey to unmask, and it will vary depending on the environments we're in. But I think for me, as what we can do as individuals, is if someone's quieter in a space or appearing less engaged, finding an opportunity to check in with them. Perhaps it's an environment that doesn't support their way of communicating or doesn't accommodate their way of processing information. So I think it's like finding ways to communicate with other people and having conversations, and also, where possible, leading from a place of vulnerability, because it then creates a sense of safety for people to speak up.
Yeah, for sure. And would you suggest, so like for me, I spoke about this yesterday. I'm not a very social person, even though I MC things like, I would go online in a dark room for 5 hours after I'll do this today. But I've got a very small group of friends who are my people, and my type group of people. Half of them are neurodivergent, the other half aren't. But I know that I can safely be myself around those people. In my new workplace, which is, my new workplace is 50% lived experience, and I'm telling you, like 40% of those lived experience people are neurodivergent. So it's like an ADHD office, and an autistic office as well, which is actually really nice because people are able to speak about themselves so openly without being judged. And that for me is such a new thing to see. And I wish that everybody had that kind of opportunity to work in a workplace such as that, because that's the way things should be done. It should be about asking people, what's your learning style? Like, what works for you? What can I do for you to make your life easier? Rather than having to mask and having to kind of try and fit in, and then slowly unraveling that mask and then hoping that you will fit in. But sometimes you don't. So it can be incredibly tricky.
Yeah, I think it's been, for me, I've learnt since starting my lived experience journey, it's been great to connect with others like peers and stuff to get that support to be able to show up more authentically and then to get to know myself in that way. And it's been highly rewarding. And then it's also then made me much more conscious of how unsafe I still feel in other environments. And then it gives me, I guess, an opportunity to unpack that of what is it that's making me feel this way? Is it something that I can address through a conversation, or is this an organization or a group of people that aren't quite ready for I guess, being part of a community or movement or
Yeah,
vision that I'm working towards?
yeah, absolutely. Um, how do you feel employers should support people returning to the workplace? And is there any resources that you can share?
Okay, that's a really big question.
Is
Um,
this
so, so I think in terms of what organizations can do, I think it is one thing that's been big in my own journey, especially when I was struggling with mental health challenges or psychosocial disability, which I guess is still an ongoing thing, but when it was quite severe, was having, it's not necessarily just policies, but it's actually the people that can make a big difference, and being able to, for people to trust that. Um, and assume competence can make a really big difference. And then being truly sort of collaborative as a team of where we want to achieve this particular goal in our work. And it's like, how do we get there in a way that honors you as a human being and what you need to be able to get there? And I think for me, in those examples, like needing to work a lot more flexibly. And I talk about neurodivergence as a dynamic disability. So there'll be waves of intense productivity, and then there's going to be times where I'm just not going to have any capacity at all. And I was quite lucky in that circumstance to be supported to work with my capacity, and sometimes that meant working really strange hours, and also switching to part-time during a period. But I think being able to, rather than it's a you thing, it's about like a team thing and being able to work together. So I think it does come down to that. Yeah, I think as you say, it's all about like the people and how we can all show up for each other, because you can have lots of amazing, well-written policies, but it means nothing if people aren't showing up, a human and considered in a kind way.
Yeah, 100%. Somebody's asked that I often look at the box which lists neurodivergence and disability and thought, not me or too risky. What do you think about ticking the box for a regular job, not in mental health or the disability space? So I imagine this is not trying to, that was Maya who's asked this question, not trying to guess at your answer, but if you're applying for a job, sort of whether you should tick that box or not.
I think disclosure is a very complex area as well, and I think it ultimately comes down to you as an individual in terms of your sense of safety, and also how you feel. So when I was talking to different neurodivergent employees across Australia, different people, depending on their journey with their neurodivergence and their level or sense of empowerment. So some people have disclosed it to sort of as a way to quickly filter out whether a role is a good fit or not. Because if someone behaves or responds inappropriately, or then it becomes a very clear indicator that it's not the right environment to be in. But then there's also people where they very much sort of depend on the financial opportunities of a particular role, and might choose that, oh, I might not feel safe to disclose, and I'm going to wait to sound out what that workplace is like. So there's so many different factors that will come into play when you're trying to decide whether to disclose or not, and at what point. From my own personal background, there's been points when I've disclosed and it's been amazingly supportive, and then there's been points when I've disclosed and I was then deprived of my autonomy because there was, I guess, the stigma that they had and that fear of being able to talk about it. So it then became, I guess, an unhealthy environment for me to be in.
Yeah. No, yeah, I can completely relate to that exact comment of what you said. It's kind of that 50-50 split of like 1 minute you're like perfectly accommodated for, and then you go for another job and it's the complete polar opposite. It's yeah, it's staggering. Somebody's asked, what kind of accommodations can people ask for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think everyone's going to have different needs to be able to support them in how they do their work best. And I think there's many organizations that list out accommodations, but I think where possible, being in a supportive environment and being able to discuss what kind of things you may need, not just based on a particular list. And I'm a personally big fan of like universal design to ensure people have what they need from the very beginning. So I think it's like that kind of yoga analogy I mentioned in my presentation of when you rock up to a class, you just grab whatever it is you need to be able to have the best class and best experience. And you don't have to provide, I guess, a doctor's letter or a physio letter to justify why you need a block or a bolster. And also it can fluctuate from different days depending on where you're at. So I think being able to have conversations about what you need on an ongoing basis, because things will fluctuate. There's going to be really good days or sort of days where we're just sort of struggling a lot more because nothing is, I guess, static, and mental health can evolve as well. So being able to have those like open communication lines of what is it that I need in this moment, and is that something that we can work with? So
Yeah.
hopefully that helps.
No, yeah, that does. And just reflecting on the things that you said, I like I said, I can personally relate to 96% of probably what you've spoken about today. And I know there'll be people in the audience who feel the same way, and really appreciate the work that you're doing. I look forward to reading more and hearing more about what you're doing and how we can get this kind of work nationally, really working across different sectors. And like you mentioned before, like I've worked with construction areas, I've worked with startups and things like that. It needs to be fed through to all industries of work, and understood. And it's just not at the moment. And it's good that you're taking the steps to try and make a change and make a difference. And you should be really proud of yourself that you're doing that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Jess. I think in closing, I think there's so many amazing people in the lived experience sector who are doing great things in the neurodivergent space. And I think it's all like, how do we come from it in our own unique position to be able to make a difference based on, I guess, our own strengths. So it's
Yeah,
exciting. And thank you so much.
that's all right. Well, thank you very much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Explore more Perspectives 2025 on Finding North Network's YouTube channel. Find out more by visiting findingnorthnetwork.com.au or email info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.